For a while, the Masiello family up in Yonkers was a real problem, but they seem to have just slipped into memory now. Anyway, Frank Brasco, he was a congressional representative from New York from 1967 to 75. In 1973, Brasco and his uncle Joe were charged with conspiring to accept illegal payments totaling about 27,500 bribes, in other words, to help a mafioso with the Genovese crime family, a captain named Gentleman John Masiello, get post office contracts. Masiello had a lot of trucks, and they tried to apply pressure. They got caught. Masiello started his career way back in the early 50s. He was first identified as a soldier with the Genovese crime family in 52 as one of their loan sharkers. He later rose to the rank of captain, obviously. Brasco said he didn't know who Masiello was. Never heard of him. He didn't know he had anything to do with crime or anything else. But the chief of the organized crime task force in Southern District of New York said, no, that's not true. We have recordings of you not only mentioning Masiello by name, but by mentioning that he's a member of the mafia. Masiello, by the way, was considered to be the trucking czar of Kennedy Airport, that the mob controlled, the Genovese control. So the first trial against Brasco was in a hung jury, and then the mob gave Masiello permission to testify as long as no mob guys were hurt. They didn't care, and he said, sure, all right. So he cooperated with the government, and Brasco was convicted in a second trial. He sentenced to 5 years in prison, with all but 3 months of that suspended. He didn't get a break. He was fined and disbarred. He died in 1998 at the relatively early age of 66. Masiello spent 7 years in prison for trying to bribe a United States congressman. His son, John Jr., was sentenced to 3 years on the same charges. So during the trial, the government had it in their head that Masiello Sr. is going to flip on the Genovese crime family. He's going to let it all go. So they treated him, they gave him baby gloves. They said, well, here, you want, they gave him 2 6-day furloughs from prison to visit his wife, and then 2 more to visit his mistress, if you can believe this. Then they said, look, we'll relocate you, we'll give you a different personality, different name and so forth, and your wife. And Masiello said, well, what about my mistress? Will you relocate her too? And it fell apart. He had no intention of testifying against those guys, but the ball's on this guy, though, no? He's trying to get his mistress as well as his wife. So in 1969, John Masiello Jr. Was sentenced to 5 to 10 years in prison for assaulting and maiming a man outside a bar in 1966. In 1970, Masiello Sr., the father, was involved in a federal case in which an IRS agent was accused of taking bribes from the Genovese family. And later that year, Masiello, was a bad year, pled guilty to strong-arm attempt to take over a legitimate Bronx poultry firm. It was hard to believe they had poultry firms in the Bronx at one time, by forcing it into bankruptcy. 2 guys joined him in the scam, Masilo, Serfino Masilo, who reoccurs again and again with the Masiello family. A guy named Michael Altro. I couldn't find anything else out about Altro. He just seems to have slid off the board. Then in 1970, John Jr. is arrested again for the vicious beating of 4 stockbrokers outside a Midland Rendezvous bar in Yonkers. And with him was Silvio Miniconi and his brother Joe Miniconi. So these 4 stockbrokers, they stopped in for a nightcap. An argument broke out when they asked the Miniconis and Masiello to please quiet down. They're being too loud. A fight broke out. One of the stockbrokers died 2 days later from a beating, and the second one lost an eye in this thing. Severio Monacconi, who had a prior charge in 1965 for beating up a cop, pled guilty to second-degree manslaughter. He got 2 to 5 years in state prison. That's an awfully light sentence, isn't it? So this means he did, what, 2 years probably? Monacconi had previously done a stretch also in a federal prison on a narcotics charge. In 1982, Monacconi was released from Austin Correctional. He went to a bar in Yonkers. First thing he did, he gets into an argument with this transient, this guy who was hanging out in the bar over a shuffleboard game of all things. Monacconi leaves the bar, comes back with a gun, walks up behind the guy, shoots him in the back of the head, kills him dead on the spot. So in October 1978, John Masiello Sr. was given 5 years in a stolen securities case. And then 3 days later, he pled guilty to stealing $17,000 from a Westchester bank. Him and his guys were going to deposit a slew of worthless checks, try to withdraw the money as soon as they could before they could get cleared with the bank. That didn't work. He got arrested. Masiello, the senior now, was convicted of criminal contempt in court in early 1960 when he refused to answer any questions about the Bronx grand jury on organized crime activities in the Bronx. So again, this guy's been around for a while. Later that year, now we're talking back in 1978, he was linked to a stolen security scandal in Florida. This guy's all over the place. A case in which a Long Island businessman testified that Masiello got almost $1 million from him for protection from what he called the Long Island mob. And in each case of a trucking firm, there's another case in a trucking firm. Masiello was leasing his truck to the city of Yonkers, and the trucks never showed up. He took the money. Just incredible. Then in 1972, another son, Kenneth Masiello, was held on bribery charges. In the aftermath of what they tried to do is torch a bar in the Bronx. What the witnesses said they saw a man dash out of the bar. He was on fire. This is the Executive Lounge on East 149th Street down in the South Bronx. Moments later, the whole bar blows up in a big flame. The fleeing guy, somebody grabs him. He attempts to escape. He jumps in the car. They get him, and the guy who was driving also gets yanked out, and they both get arrested. They were identified as Charles Gouda and Colbert Foutille. So they're arrested. They're brought down to the Alexander Avenue station house. And who shows up but John Masiello Jr. and Nicholas Greco. And they offer the cops $200 down on a $2,000 bribe to release the two guys. The cops arrested everybody for attempted bribery. And then on February 5, 1982, Kenneth Masiello, he had just got out of Danbury on a gun charge. And he was walking in a parking lot in Howard Johnson's restaurant. Who remembers those? And somebody walked up behind him and shot him dead twice in the face. So in 1990, John Masiello Sr. and his son Jr., Sal Basilone, remember him, we talked about him, and James Jimmy the Lump Lombardo were charged in a loan sharking operation while they were working for Daniel Pagnano, who was a mob guy, who I think might still be around. The prosecution said that the whole group had planned to buy large quantities of cocaine in Florida, resell it in New York. John Jr. was sentenced to 1 to 3 years. John Masiello Sr., he died, this is in 1990, before he could be sentenced. So these guys were hell on wheels for a while, weren't
I'm in a hurry. To the House of Representatives. Ride like fury. If you run out of gas, get Ethel. If Ethel runs out, get Mabel. Now step on it. Well, it certainly feels good to be back again. I've got an appointment to insult Ambassador Trentino. I don't want to keep him waiting. Step on it. This is the 5th trip I've made today, and I haven't been anywhere yet. Oh, no, you don't. I'm not taking any more chances. You can only fool a firefly twice. This time you ride in the sidecar. This is the only way to travel.